Good evening, everyone. Tonight's tale carries the faint scent of roses, and something far less pleasant. We're travelling back to the 18th century, when perfume so elegant, so refined was made from decay, sweat, and the secretions of caged animals. Beauty, as it turns out, has always come at a cost. Before we begin today's video, I could really use your help. We've noticed the channel's reach has dipped a little, and one of the best ways you can support us is by subscribing. It's quick, completely free, and it helps us carry on bringing you new and fascinating stories. Your support truly means the world to us, and together we can keep this channel growing. Thank you ever so much. Now let's get on with today's story, and don't forget to tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is right now. I love seeing listeners from all around the world. Now, dim the lights, settle in, and let's drift into the strange, fragrant world of 18th century perfume. I was 17 when I first entered the workshop of Maître Delorme on the Rue des Lombards in Paris in the year of our Lord 1732. The door was oak, dark with age and oil from countless hands, and when it swung inward, the smell that met me was not what I had imagined perfume to be. It was rot, not the simple decay of kitchen scraps or the midden heap, but something more complex, a thick, cloying sweetness laced with ammonia, and the unmistakable tang of flesh gone soft. My eyes watered, my throat closed. I nearly turned back into the narrow street with its familiar stenches of horse dung and human waste, stenches that suddenly seemed wholesome by comparison. But I did not turn back. My father had paid 30 livres for this apprenticeship, a sum that represented 6 months of his labour as a tanner. The irony was not lost on me even then, that he, who worked daily with the hides of dead animals, should send his son to learn a trade he believed more refined, more suited to a young man with letters and a clean hand. He did not know, could not have known, what refinement truly meant in the world of perfume. Maître Delorme himself appeared from the gloom of the workshop's interior. He was a small man, no taller than myself, but he carried himself with the rigid posture of one accustomed to authority. His clothes were fine, a coat of deep blue wool, breeches of pale grey, stockings without a single snag, but his hands told a different story. They were stained a peculiar yellow-brown, the nails darkened and the fingers bearing the marks of burns and cuts that had healed poorly. He looked at me with eyes the colour of weak tea, assessing, calculating. "You are the tanner's son," he said. It was not a question. "Yes, maître." "Then you are not afraid of unpleasant work?" "No, maître." He smiled, though there was no warmth in it. "We shall see." The workshop occupied the ground floor of a building that leaned slightly to the left, as if tired of standing upright after so many years. The ceiling was low, crossed with blackened beams, and the windows were small and set high in the walls, admitting only thin shafts of light that did little to illuminate the space. Along one wall stood a great workbench, its surface scarred and stained with substances I could not identify. Above it, shelves held an array of bottles, jars, and clay vessels, each labelled in a hand so precise it seemed almost mechanical. But it was the centre of the room that held my attention. There, on a table of rough wood, sat a large earthenware crock, and from it emanated the source of that overwhelming smell. Beside it lay what I first took to be a pile of old leather, but which I soon understood to be something else entirely. "Come closer," Maître Delorme commanded. I obeyed, though every instinct urged me to flee. As I approached, the smell intensified until it seemed to coat my tongue and throat, until I could taste it as much as smell it. The pile beside the crock resolved into shapes I recognized, the small bodies of animals, their fur matted and dull, their forms flattened and distorted by some process I did not yet understand. "Civets," the maître said, gesturing to the creatures. "From Africa, by way of Amsterdam. Do you know what we extract from them?" I shook my head, not trusting my voice. "A substance more valuable than gold, weight for weight. A single ounce can perfume 1,000 handkerchiefs, can transform the basest mixture into something the king himself would wear." He reached into the crock with a small wooden paddle and withdrew a dollop of thick yellowish paste. The smell that rose from it was indescribable, fecal and floral at once, repulsive and strangely compelling. "This is civet, the secretion from a gland near the animal's well. You will learn the anatomy soon enough." He held the paddle toward me. "Smell it, truly smell it. Do not turn away." I bent forward, fighting the urge to vomit, and inhaled. The odour invaded my senses with such force that I stumbled backward, my hand clapped over my mouth and nose. Maître Delorme laughed, a dry sound like leaves scraping stone. "Every apprentice has that same reaction," he said, "but you will learn. In time, you will smell the rose hidden within the rot, the jasmine lurking beneath the filth. That is the art of perfumery, to find beauty in corruption, to extract elegance from excrement. Would you have dared, I wonder now, to continue? Would you have remained in that dim workshop, with that stench filling your lungs, knowing that this was to be your daily bread?" I nearly did not, but I thought of my father's 30 livres, of his pride when he told our neighbours his son was to be a perfumer, and I swallowed my disgust and nodded. "I will learn, maître." "Yes," he said, studying me with those pale eyes. "I believe you will." The days that followed were an education in horror. I learned that the civets were kept alive in wooden cages in a room behind the workshop, where they paced and screamed with voices like distressed infants. Twice each week, Maître Delorme would extract their secretions, a process that involved restraining the animal and scraping the gland with a small spatula. The creatures fought and bit, their terror palpable, and the paste that was gathered had to be immediately transferred to earthenware crocks where it would ripen. That was the word the maître used, ripen, as if it were fruit for several months before it could be used. But civet was only the beginning. There was musk as well, that other cornerstone of fine perfumery, extracted from the gland of the musk deer. The deer themselves I never saw alive. They came from the distant east, from mountains I could not imagine, and what arrived in Paris were the dried glands, dark pods no larger than a walnut, packed in silk and sealed with wax. The smell of musk was different from civetless faecal, more animal, with a warmth that seemed almost alive. Maître Delorme taught me to open the pods carefully, to scrape out the grainy substance within without wasting a single grain, for musk was even more costly than civet. "A man could live for a year," he told me, "on what we pay for a single pound of Tonkin musk." I believed him. I'd seen the locked cabinet where the most precious materials were kept, had watched him weigh out tiny portions with the concentration of an alchemist measuring gold. There were other materials as well, less famous but no less disturbing. Castoreum, extracted from the castor sacs of beavers, arrived in leathery pouches that had to be soaked and then pressed to release their tarry, medicinal-smelling contents. Ambergris, that mysterious substance vomited by whales and found floating in distant oceans, came in grey lumps that looked like stone, but could be softened with warmth and then dissolved in spirits of wine. It smelled of the sea, of brine and depth and something indefinably sweet. And then there was the work itself, the daily labour that occupied my hands and filled my nostrils with stenches that no washing could fully remove. I learned to scrape and measure, to heat and blend, to test each batch with my nose, until I could detect the slightest variation in scent. My hands became stained like the maître's. My clothes permeated with odours that caused people to step aside when I walked through the streets. My mother wept the first time I came home after a week in the workshop. "You smell like the grave," she said, and would not embrace me until I had stripped and washed in the yard, though it was February and the water in the basin had a skin of ice. But gradually, as the maître had promised, my nose began to change. What had been simply repulsive became complex. I began to detect the nuances within the rot, the layers of scent that composed each material. Civet, I learned, had a floral quality when greatly diluted, a richness that enhanced other perfumes without revealing its own foul nature. Musk added depth and persistence, a warm animal presence that made fragrances cling to skin and fabric. Castoreum brought a leathery, slightly bitter note that suggested luxury and age, and ambergris was magic, a fixative that bound all the other scents together and made them last, that added a subtle marine sweetness unlike anything else in nature. the maître taught me to work with these base notes first, to build the foundation of a perfume from the most disturbing materials, and only then to add the flowers, the rose and jasmine, the orange blossom and tuberose, the lavender and bergamot. The flowers, he said, were merely decoration. Any apothecary could distill flowers, but to master the animal essences, to coax beauty from decay, that required true skill. "This is why we are artists," he would say, his stained fingers measuring out a minuscule portion of civet to add to a blend of rose and jonquil, and not mere merchants of toilet water. I was 19 when I first created a perfume of my own, a composition the maître deemed worthy of sale. It was built around musk and civet, softened with neroli and sharpened with a touch of bergamot, with the smallest hint of ambergris to make it last. When it was finished, when the liquid had clarified in its bottle and caught the light like amber, the maître held it to his nose and breathed deeply. "This," he said, "could perfume a duchess." The pride I felt was complicated by the knowledge of what I had handled to create that beautiful scent, what I had scraped and measured and blended. The Comtesse de Montseuil bought 12 bottles of my perfume that spring, and when I saw her at a distance some months later, walking in the Tuileries garden with her ladies, I smelled my creation before I saw her face. It seemed impossible that such an elegant woman, dressed in silk the colour of dawn, could wear something that began its life in the anal glands of a small African mammal. But that was the secret, was it not? The secret that we perfumers guarded as jealously as any recipe. That beauty required corruption, that the most refined scents of the aristocracy were built upon a foundation of rot and excrement and animal secretions, that every fine lady and gentleman who anointed themselves with perfume was, unknowingly, wearing the processed effluvia of dead and dying creatures. The years passed. I became not just an apprentice, but a journeyman, and then, when Maître Delorme died of an apoplexy in the summer of 1748, I inherited his workshop and his formulas and his caged civets that screamed in the night. I was 23 years old and a master perfumer, with stained hands and a nose so trained that I could identify 50 different materials in a single breath. By then, the workshop on the Rue des Lombards had become too small for my ambitions. Paris was in the grip of perfume fever. The court at Versailles had made scent fashionable, not merely fashionable, but necessary. To appear at court without perfume was to mark oneself as provincial, as poor, as unworthy of notice. The king himself changed his scent daily, and his mistresses competed to wear the rarest and most expensive compositions. But beneath this obsession with perfume lay something darker, something that I, who worked daily with the materials of fragrance, understood better than most. Paris stank, London stank. Every city in Europe stank with a ferocity that is difficult to convey to those who have not known it. The streets ran with filth human waste, animal carcasses, the slops from kitchens and workshops and tanners' vats. The Seine was an open sewer. In summer, the heat drew the stench upward until it seemed to hang in the air like fog. In winter, it froze into the mud and waited to thaw again with the spring rains. And the people themselves, Lord, the people stank worst of all. Bathing was considered dangerous, a practice that opened the pores to disease and corruption. The wealthy changed their linen daily and powdered their bodies with scented powders, but beneath the powder and the perfume was the inescapable odour of human flesh, unwashed and fermenting. I have stood in rooms full of nobles, men and women dressed in silks that cost more than my house was worth, and been nearly overcome by the collective reek of their bodies. Perfume, then, was not merely ornament, it was necessity, it was armour against the stench of the world, and against one's own smell as well. The wealthy doused themselves in it, wore pomanders and scented gloves, carried handkerchiefs soaked in perfume to hold to their noses when the smell of the streets grew too foul. They perfumed their rooms, their furniture, their beds. They perfumed their wigs, those great towering structures of horsehair and powder that harboured lice and shed clouds of dust with every movement. Could you smell it, I wonder? Could you smell the rot beneath the roses, the sweat beneath the sandalwood? Could you smell what I smelled, standing in my workshop late at night, surrounded by bottles of scents that cost more than gold, knowing that every one of them was meant to disguise corruption with corruption, to mask the smell of decay with substances extracted from the decaying. The irony was not lost on me, but there was money to be made, and I made it. By 1753, I had opened a second workshop in the Faubourg Saint-Honoré, in a building with glass windows and a painted sign that read Parfumerie Delacroix in letters of gold. My name, my establishment. I employed 6 apprentices and 2 journeymen, and supplied perfumes to 3 duchesses, 2 marquises, and a bishop who bought prodigious quantities of a musk-based composition that he claimed aided his meditations. The work grew no less disturbing with success. Indeed, it grew worse, for I was now wealthy enough to import materials that Maître Delorme could only have dreamed of. I purchased civet cats by the dozen, keeping them in a shed behind my main workshop where their screams could not disturb the customers. I bought musk in quantities that required a locked room and an armed guard. I experimented with new materials, hyraceum, the crystallized urine of the rock hyrax, which added an animalic note unlike any other. Oud, the resinous heartwood of diseased aquilaria trees, which smelled of leather and smoke and ancient temples. And I began to travel, for the finest materials could not always be trusted to merchants and factors. In 1755 I journeyed to Grasse in the south, where the flowers grew in such profusion that the entire countryside seemed to swim in their perfume. There I learned the art of enfleurage, pressing fresh jasmine and tuberose petals into purified fat, which would absorb their scent over many weeks, until the fat itself became perfume. The women who did this work sat in dim rooms, plucking petals and arranging them on glass plates spread with lard, their fingers stained yellow with pollen, their eyes red from the cloying sweetness of the flowers. "Why not just distill them?" I asked the master of the operation, a man named Bertrand who owned 1,000 acres of jasmine. "The heat destroys the finest notes," he said. "What you capture in the still is only a shadow of the living flower. But this," he held up a pot of enfleurage pomade, solid and white and smelling of jasmine so intense it made my head swim. "This is the soul of the flower, captured without violence." I bought 50 pounds of jasmine absolute from him, at a price that would have purchased a small house. When I returned to Paris, I blended it with civet and ambergris, and created a perfume I called Âme de Fleur, soul of flower. It sold to the Marquise de Pompadour herself, who declared it the finest scent she had ever worn. She did not know, could not have known, that half the composition was scraped from the backsides of animals I kept caged in my shed. But the success brought its own troubles. Competitors emerged, claiming their perfumes were superior to mine, that their methods were more refined, their materials more pure. I knew this for the lie it was. We all used the same materials, scraped from the same glands, extracted from the same secretions, but the lie was useful to them, and so they told it, and I lost customers. Worse, there were those who began to question the practice itself. A physician named Rousseau published a pamphlet in 1758, arguing that perfume was not merely unnecessary, but actively harmful, that it trapped miasmas against the skin and prevented the body's natural humours from escaping. He wrote that the use of animal-derived scents was particularly dangerous, as these substances carried within them the essence of the creatures from which they came, and could corrupt the human form by introducing bestial vapours into the flesh. The pamphlet caused a scandal. Several of my customers ceased their orders, claiming they feared for their health. Others became furtive, sending servants to purchase perfume rather than coming themselves, as if ashamed to be associated with the trade. I read Rousseau's pamphlet by candlelight in my workshop, surrounded by the tools of my craft, the crocks of ripening civet, the bottles of musk, the pots of enfleurage pomade. His words rang with a certain truth. I could not deny it. Were we not, in fact, rubbing corruption into our skin in the name of elegance? Were we not attempting to disguise the natural smell of human life with the processed secretions of dying animals? But what choice did we have? To go without perfume was to announce oneself as unbearably malodorous in a world where everyone stank. Better to smell of musk and roses than of shit and sweat. Better to wear the glands of a civet than to be avoided by all who came near. I wrote no response to Rousseau. Instead, I created a new perfume, one I called Naturel, which used the smallest possible amount of animal materials and relied more heavily on flowers and herbs. It sold poorly. People did not want natural. They wanted transformation. They wanted magic. They wanted to smell like anything other than what they were. In 1762, I was summoned to Versailles. The summons came in the form of a letter on cream-coloured paper, sealed with the fleur-de-lis, written in a hand so elegant that it took me several minutes to decipher it. I was to present myself at the palace on the 15th of June at 3 o'clock in the afternoon to discuss the provision of perfumes for the royal household. I had never been to Versailles. I'd seen it only from a distance, that vast, sprawling palace that seemed less a building than a small city, its windows flashing in the sun like 1,000 eyes. As my carriage approached along the great avenue, I felt something like fear, not of the palace itself, though it was certainly intimidating, but of what I might find there, what smells, what secrets, what decay hidden beneath all that grandeur. The palace was a marvel, there was no denying it. Room after room of gilt and marble, of painted ceilings and crystal chandeliers, of mirrors that reflected the light until one seemed to walk through a landscape made of brilliance. But the smell was something else entirely. It was perfume, yes, but perfume so thick and heavy that it seemed almost solid, a miasma of clashing scents that clung to the throat and made the eyes water. And beneath the perfume, seeping through it like water through sand, was the smell of unwashed bodies, of chamber pots inadequately emptied, of food gone slightly bad in overheated rooms. In the corners of corridors I glimpsed stains on the walls that I preferred not to examine too closely. The palace, I realized, was simply too large to keep clean, too sprawling to manage, and so the filth accumulated in hidden places and was covered over with perfume and powder and denial. I was received by the Marquis de Marigny, brother to Madame de Pompadour, who had died 3 years previous, but whose influence still lingered like her favourite perfume. The Marquis was a thin man with a perpetual expression of faint distaste, as if the world emitted an odour just slightly more unpleasant than he could tolerate. "Monsieur Delacroix," he said, looking me over with those critical eyes, "we have heard excellent things about your perfumes." The late Marquise held them in high regard. "I am honoured, my lord. The king wishes to commission a new scent, something unique, something that has never been worn by anyone else. Can you provide such a thing?" "Certainly, my lord. I would need to know something of His Majesty's preferences." The Marquis waved a hand vaguely. "He wishes something bold, something that announces presence, something that will be remembered." I understood. He wanted a perfume that would mark the king as singular, as beyond the reach of ordinary mortals. He wanted transformation, made scent. "It will take time," I said. "To create something truly unique requires experimentation, testing, aging, perhaps 3 months." "You have 6 weeks," the Marquis said, "and you will be paid 500 livres for the commission, plus an annual retainer, if the perfume pleases." 500 livres, more than I had earned in my first 5 years as a master perfumer. I bowed deeply. "It will be done, my lord." I returned to Paris in a state of exhilaration and terror. To create a perfume for the king, it was the pinnacle of my profession, the achievement that would cement my reputation forever. But it was also a test that I might fail, and failure would mean disgrace and the loss of all I had built. I shut myself in my workshop and forbade anyone to disturb me. For 3 weeks, I did nothing but blend and test, discard and begin again. I used materials I had been hoarding for years, musk from Tibet that smelled of snow and mountains, oud from Malaya that was so rich it seemed almost black, ambergris from the coast of Morocco that had the complexity of fine wine. I added jasmine from grass and rose from Turkey, neroli from Tunisia, and sandalwood from India. I balanced the animal notes with the floral ones, the dark with the light, the filth with the beauty, and slowly, over those weeks of obsessive labour, something emerged. A perfume that smelled of power and age, of luxury and danger, of flowers growing in a graveyard. It was beautiful and terrible at once, seductive and repellent, exactly like the court itself. When I finally poured it into a crystal flacon and sealed it with wax, I knew that I had created something extraordinary. I also knew what it truly was, a masterpiece built from corruption. Every note in that perfume derived from something dead or dying, from glands and secretions and the processed waste of animals. The beauty was a lie, or rather, it was a truth that depended on ignoring the reality of its origins. I delivered the perfume to Versailles on the 1st of August, presenting it to the Marquis de Marigny in a velvet-lined case. He took the flacon delicately, as if it might explode, and removed the stopper. The scent that emerged filled the room, dense, complex, unmistakably regal. The Marquis inhaled deeply, his expression unreadable. "What do you call it?" he asked. I'd considered many names. "Roy," I said simply. "King." He smiled, a rare expression on that sour face. "The King will receive you tomorrow at 10 o'clock. You will present the perfume yourself." The King was in his private apartments when I was admitted, a suite of rooms smaller and more intimate than the public spaces, though no less luxurious. He sat in a chair by the window, morning light falling across his face and picking out the lines of age and dissipation. He was 52 that year, but looked older, worn down by the weight of absolute power and the pleasure with which he wielded it. "Approach," he said, his voice mild. I came forward and knelt, offering the flacon. He took it with fingers heavy with rings and opened it. For a long moment, he simply inhaled, his eyes closed. The room was silent except for the ticking of a clock somewhere in the distance. "Tell me what is in this," he said finally, his eyes still closed. I hesitated. Did he truly want to know? Did he want to hear about the civet glands and the musk pods, the castoreum and the ambergris? Or did he want the pretty lie, the story of flowers and sunlight? "Tell me," he repeated, opening his eyes and looking at me directly. So I told him. I listed every material, explained every process, described the sources and the methods. I told him about the civets in their cages, the scraped glands, the ripening in earthenware crocks. I told him about the musk deer shot in distant mountains, their glands cut out and dried and shipped across the world. I told him about the whale vomit and the beaver sacs and the crystallized urine of small African mammals. When I finished, the room was very quiet. The King looked at the flacon in his hand as if seeing it for the first time. "So," he said softly, "to smell like a king, one must wear the arsehole of a cat." "Yes, Your Majesty," I said, because there was nothing else to say. He laughed then, a genuine sound of amusement. "How perfect! How absolutely perfect!" He stoppered the flacon and stood, crossing to a cabinet from which he removed a leather purse. He tossed it to me. I caught it clumsily, shocked by the gesture. "Your payment, and double the retainer. You will make this perfume for me, and only for me, for as long as I live, and you will tell no one what is in it." "Yes, Your Majesty." "Now go, and thank you, Monsieur Delacroix, for your honesty. It is a rare quality, even among perfumers." I left Versailles that day a wealthy man. The purse contained not 500, but 1,000 livres, and the annual retainer was set at 200 more. I had achieved what every perfumer dreamed of, a royal patron, an exclusive commission, security and status beyond measure. But as my carriage rattled back to Paris, I found myself thinking about the King's laugh, about his comment on the perfume's composition. He had understood, in a way that most of my customers did not, what perfume truly was. He had seen through the beautiful lie to the disgusting truth beneath, and had found it amusing rather than appalling. Perhaps that was what it meant to be truly powerful, to know the corruption that underlay all beauty, and to wear it anyway, to acknowledge the rot and embrace it, to transform it into something valuable not by denying its nature but by accepting it. Or perhaps he simply didn't care. Perhaps when one is king, when one's word is law, and one's presence is divinity made flesh, the source of one's perfume is as irrelevant as the source of one's power, both built on suffering, both requiring the transformation of base materials into refined products, both dependent on a willingness to ignore the screams of those who provide the raw materials. The years that followed were prosperous ones. I supplied perfume to the King until his passing, in 1774, and then to his grandson who succeeded him. I opened a third shop, this one in London, which proved even more profitable than my Paris establishments. The English, I discovered, were even more obsessed with perfume than the French. Perhaps because they lived in an even filthier city, or perhaps because their puritanical heritage made them uncomfortable with their own bodies and desperate to mask their physical reality. I grew wealthy. I married a perfumer's daughter from Grasse, a woman who understood the trade and did not flinch at the smells that clung to my person. We had 3 children, though only 2 survived past infancy. I purchased a country house with gardens where I grew my own lavender and rose. I became respectable, a man of substance, a master of the Perfumers' Guild. But I never forgot what the work truly was. Every day, I handled materials that would have made most people vomit. Every day, I scraped and measured and blended substances extracted from the bodies of dying creatures. Every day, I created beauty from corruption and sold it to people who believed they were buying elegance and refinement. In 1776, I hired a new apprentice, a boy of 16 named Claude, who came from a family of soap makers. On his first day, I took him into the workshop and showed him the crock of ripening civet. I watched his face as the smell hit him, watched him struggle not to recoil. "What do you smell?" I asked him. "Rot," he said, his voice strained. "Filth. Something wrong." "Yes," I said, "and in a year you will smell flowers. You will smell the secret heart of the finest perfumes ever made. You will smell what the king wears to bed and what the queen dabs on her handkerchief. You will smell luxury and refinement and all the things that separate the high from the low." "But it's still rot," he said, meeting my eyes. There was something defiant in his gaze, something that reminded me of myself at that age. "Yes," I agreed, "it's still rot. It will always be rot. The question is, can you live with that knowledge? Can you make beauty from it anyway? Can you sell it to duchesses and know that what you're selling them is the processed excrement of caged animals, and sleep soundly nonetheless?" He was silent for a long moment, staring into that crock of civet. Then he nodded slowly. "I think I can," he said. "Then you will be a perfumer," I told him. "I'm an old man now, writing this in the last years of the 18th century. The world has changed in ways I could not have imagined in my youth. There has been revolution in France, terror in the streets. The king I once served beheaded by his own subjects. The perfume trade has suffered. Who wants expensive scents when bread is scarce? But it has not died. People still want to smell of something other than themselves, even in times of upheaval. Perhaps especially in times of upheaval. My hands shake now when I try to measure out civet or musk. My nose is not what it was. Too many years of breathing in ammonia and decay have dulled my senses. I've turned over the daily operations of my business to Claude, who proved as skilled as I had hoped. He runs the workshops now, maintaining the formulas I created, serving the new generation of wealthy who have emerged from the revolution's chaos. But sometimes, late at night, I go down to the workshop and stand among the crocks and bottles and cages. I smell the familiar stenches that once made me gag, that I learned to tolerate, then to pass, then to transform into beauty. And I think about what we did, what I spent my life doing. We took suffering and made it luxury. We took decay and made it desirable. We took the secretions of tormented animals and spread them on the skin of the wealthiest people in Europe and told them they smelled like flowers. And they believed us, because they wanted to believe, because the alternative to smell themselves, to acknowledge their own corruption, was unthinkable. Was it wrong? I do not know. The civets would have lived and died regardless of my work, though perhaps not in cages. The musk deer would still have been hunted, though perhaps not so intensively. The whales would still have vomited their ambergris into the sea, whether or not anyone was there to collect it. And people would still have stunk, would still have sought ways to mask their odours, would still have purchased whatever promised to transform them into something more refined than their animal nature allowed. I was simply the intermediary, the alchemist, who turned base matter into gold. If I had not done it, another would have. The demand existed. I merely supplied it. But late at night, when sleep eludes me and my joints ache and I can hear Claude downstairs preparing the next day's materials, I think about all those civets I kept caged, all their screaming nights. I think about the musk deer dying in distant mountains so that their glands could perfume a marchioness. I think about the acres of jasmine and grass, growing and dying and growing again, existing only to be plucked and pressed into fat and sold to people who would never see the fields or know the women whose stained fingers did the work. I think about the king that day at Versailles, laughing when I told him what his perfume truly contained. He understood, I believe, better than anyone else I ever met. He understood that civilization was a beautiful lie built on ugly truths, that refinement required brutality, that to smell like anything other than an animal, one had to use the processed parts of other animals. The perfume I created for him was called Roy. King. I wonder if anyone at Versailles still has a bottle of it, tucked away in some forgotten cabinet, the liquid evaporated to a sticky residue that no longer smells of anything but age. I wonder if anyone remembers what was in it, or cares. Probably not. That is perhaps the final irony, that the perfumes I spent my life creating, the compositions that required such skill and such willingness to handle the disgusting, are all ephemeral. They evaporate. They fade. They are worn and washed away, leaving nothing behind but memory, and even memory fades faster than scent. In 50 years, perhaps no one will remember my name. In 100, the formulas I guarded so carefully will be lost or obsolete, replaced by new methods, new materials, new lies about what beauty requires. But for now, for this moment, in this workroom that smells of civet and musk and jasmine, I remember. I remember what it took to make perfume in the 18th century, what it required of those who made it and those who wore it. I remember the compromises and the horrors and the strange, terrible beauty that emerged from the rot. Could you have done it?